What's going on, guys? So this is going to be a super controversial topic. There's going to be a lot of folks who are going to put some really interesting comments in the comments section, and I'm expecting it. So just understand, I'm going into this video knowing that there's going to be a lot of people who do not approve of this topic, but I'm going to say it anyways. And I'm going to lead into the intro with, old trucks are not more reliable than new trucks. Hang tight, I'll be right back. All right, so boy, I get this argument all the time whenever I'm reviewing new vehicles. Doesn't matter what manufacturer it is, there's always these comments saying new vehicles are just horrible, they don't last, they break down all the time. Give me a truck from 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and that is a reliable truck. That truck is going to outlast any modern truck. And I'm sure there are some older trucks that will outlast newer trucks. I'm sure some folks out there either take such good care of that vehicle that they replace parts that are about to break, or they do things that keep that truck running in a way that some new trucks can't compete with. But I would say that is very rare. The fact is, newer modern trucks are far more reliable overall than older trucks. Now, you can talk about some of the older diesel engines and you can say, okay, the old 7.3 Power Stroke or the old Cummins and these platforms were reliable and are incredibly reliable platforms. Well, that's true. They are and they were reliable platforms. But typically, they are and were reliable platforms because you had to do a lot of stuff to those trucks to make them that way. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some bone stock Cummins from 1995 that is still on the road with 500,000+ miles on it and it's never had a single mechanical breakdown. Well, the reality is everything else in that truck is probably broken down. The AC's probably stopped working. The dash is probably completely destroyed. The radio's probably gone out. The different components from the mechanical structure of the vehicle have started failing. And again, people like to make this claim that older vehicles are easier to work on, which is true in many ways, but at the same time, you have to do a lot more of that work. When you look at modern vehicles these days, a modern pickup truck can typically go about 150,000 miles before anything breaks on it. All you have to do is oil changes. When I grew up, if somebody had a Dodge Ram or a Ford F-150 or something, I'm going to tell you at about 60 to 70,000 miles, you started having major issues with the truck. You started having water pumps go out, power steering pumps, alternators. Components would start going out on that vehicle. Now, granted, some of these components, not all of them, but some of them were easier to replace back then. The trucks were easier to work on back then because they didn't have as many computers in them. They really didn't have a need to be plugged into a diagnostic machine to give you information back then. Now, when you look at modern trucks, the reality is the materials in them just last longer. The frames last longer. The suspension components last longer. The lighting in them lasts longer. I mean, here's an example. So if you have a newer truck that has modern lighting in it, you will probably never need to change a bulb ever in your entire vehicle. There's just really no need to change LED bulbs unless there's some electrical issue with the bulb itself. So if you have LED headlights, if your dash is LED, if you have lights inside of your vehicle that are LED, gone are the days where you had to search around, Pep Boys or AutoZone for tiny little bulbs to replace the bulb in your dome light. Or, headlight bulbs. Replacing headlight bulbs on newer vehicles, if they're equipped with LED headlights, thing of the past. You just don't do it anymore. Now, if one fails, it's going to cost you more to replace. LED bulbs aren't replaceable per se in newer vehicles. You have to replace the entire headlight assembly. So I understand that if you do have a failure, it's probably going to cost you more, and it's likely going to require more mechanical knowledge to actually replace that component, because you're removing something that wasn't really designed to ever fail. if that makes sense. So in the past, almost all of the light bulbs in your car were accessible relatively easily because they knew that if it were an incandescent bulb or a halogen bulb, it needed to be replaced at a certain frequency or your bulb would burn out. And bulb technology got better and better and better to the point to where bulbs just didn't fail very often. But again, we're talking about newer vehicles. As you got newer with vehicles, bulbs just seemed to last longer. Now they've switched to LED lighting, and arguably you should never have to replace a bulb in your vehicle ever again if you have a vehicle that's equipped with all LED lighting. Now, some vehicles have a lot of LED lighting and they'll have a few incandescent bulbs still, like for your brake lights or a turn signal or something like that. But those bulbs even last longer than they ever have. So again, when we talk about vehicles being reliable, you have to look at the entire platform. You can't really just pick and choose one thing and say, well, you know, the interior of this vehicle was pretty reliable, so it was a better vehicle back then. The reality is most vehicles, most light-duty passenger vehicles, have 125 to 150,000 mile life before requiring any major service. Many vehicles, most vehicles, 15, 20 years ago, had a 60,000 mile life before you had to replace something major. And if you didn't replace something major, you would essentially void your warranty if that component failed. And I remember looking at some vehicles where if you didn't replace a timing belt at a certain interval, if that belt broke, not only were you past your warranty, but it would cause a catastrophic failure of your engine because it would destroy your engine. And you're just not seeing those types of failures in modern vehicles. You do see them occasionally, but another example of this would be like a main serpentine belt on a vehicle. In the past, you had to replace these things pretty dang often. Now, you see vehicles well over 100,000 miles and people aren't even talking about replacing a belt on them because they're just designed to last far longer than they ever have. And this is an interesting thing to talk about again, because as reliable as automotive manufacturers have made vehicles in general over the past several decades, they've really improved and evolved that technology in newer vehicles to the point to where you really don't see a lot of failures. And when you do, typically it's electrical. Typically it has something to do with the computer. It has something to do with how the system is designed to meet certain emissions criteria. But even then, the vehicles that have to meet those emissions criteria, that technology has gotten much, much better in the last couple of years. When DEF became a thing, when you started hearing acronyms like EGR, SCR, DPF, all of these things in vehicles, there was a perception that if you had this stuff in your vehicle, it was going to be a very, very unreliable vehicle. You would have many, many chances that that vehicle would break down, that it would fail. But in the last couple of years, you really haven't heard much of that. Even in the OTR industry or over the road, where you have semi-trucks that are traversing the country, a lot of these trucking companies, you know, their biggest stress was switching from trucks that had very limited emissions requirements to this new world where trucks loaded with emissions equipment that are designed to handle the particulate that would typically come out in the form of carbon. But again, you just typically don't hear those problems anymore. The manufacturers have done an exceptionally good job of making these trucks more and more reliable with fewer and fewer mechanical failures. And you can still have them, but in today's era of new pickup trucks, you're far more likely to have, you know, a complaint because the camera system doesn't load as quick as you might like it to, or because the navigation system's too complex or it's laggy, things like that, versus having an actual mechanical issue with the vehicle. In some cases, there are mechanical issues, but a lot of them can be narrowed down to batteries, right? A lot of the issues people have with pickup trucks and newer vehicles in general are the fact that the electrical system on these vehicles is demanded upon so much more than they used to be in the past, and your batteries tend to be the ones that fail quicker than anything. But I bring up this topic because almost any time we talk about trucks, We always hear folks leave comments saying, it's junk. I wish they would make a truck like they did from the 90s or the 80s. And the reality is those trucks aren't anywhere near as reliable as they are today. It's just a fact. Your specific truck may be that reliable for you, but oftentimes, if you want to actually compare every component of a truck built in the 90s to a component of a truck built, in the last couple of years, you're going to see the seats have improved, the lighting's improved, the mechanical capabilities of the truck have improved, the life of the vehicle has improved, the frame has improved, the anti-corrosive characteristics of the components have improved. I mean, there's so many ways that the industry has improved that a lot of times people don't give it the credit that it deserves because too much focus is given to a complaint that may have been legitimate for a short period of time, but probably isn't legitimate now. And again, that kind of goes back to that whole emissions thing. There's nothing really wrong with saying, hey, we want a vehicle to be cleaner. I mean, there's, as much as, people want to fight that sometimes. I'm a truck advocate. I love driving a big diesel pickup truck. The reality, though, is if you have a vehicle that throws out tons and tons and tons of emissions, you are damaging some aspect of the environment, whether or not it's just the trees that are growing on the road or the animals or the air we breathe. You're doing stuff to it. And I personally don't have any problem with mandates that require vehicles to be cleaner. That's, to me, I think it's just kind of a no-brainer. It's one of those things that if you can do it and you can still get these insanely powerful vehicles that produce so much horsepower and so much torque, why not do it? Yes, you have to buy DEF, right? Diesel exhaust fluid is now something that is pretty much burned into everybody's mind if you have a newer diesel pickup truck. But on the opposite side of that, you have these massively powerful trucks that are running cleaner than they've ever ran in the past. And as many folks like to remove this equipment and roll coal and do all these different things just to kind of show off that they can do it, I just honestly, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah, there's no practical reason to it when these trucks are already producing over 1,000 pound-feet of torque. And I get that there's a lot of folks out there who have older trucks and they want those trucks to perform like newer trucks because they may not be able to afford these outrageous prices that you see on newer trucks. So I get that. I get that folks want to modify their trucks to be more powerful. But when we talk again about newer trucks and the emissions that come on them, they've gotten so much more mechanically reliable than they've ever been. And I think that that's pretty clear. I don't think most people go to a new vehicle dealership lot, look at a new, Chevy, Ford, Ram, GMC truck with a diesel engine and go, man, I would love that truck only if it didn't have emissions related equipment on it anymore. I know it's got 1,000 plus foot-pounds of torque. I know it's got, 400 plus horsepower, but boy, that emissions equipment is the only thing that's keeping me from buying that vehicle. That's not really a topic most people have. You may specifically have that feeling, but I don't think most people do anymore. I certainly don't. If I go and look at a new vehicle, I'm not thinking about the emission system and if that system's going to fail on me because they've gotten so much better. This isn't a period of time when you had to worry about things like that, or even back during the early days of Power Stroke, back in the early 2000s, when you really had to worry if the head bolts on your engine were going to fail, or if you're going to have leaking oil, if you're going to have problems with that platform. You just don't really see those problems anymore. They're pretty much a thing of the past for most truck manufacturers. I think the biggest area of concern for most people now is when you're seeing these other features that are coming out to help trucks become more efficient, and you just hope that you don't have a problem. But at the end of the day, to kind of bring this conversation full circle, trucks are more reliable by a huge factor today than they've ever been in the past. It's just a fact. You can tow more reliably without stress of burning up your engine, without stress of overheating, without stress of having a transmission failure today than you ever could have in the past, unless you had a vehicle that was extremely modified to be able to be more reliable. And typically by doing that, you're adding modern components. You're adding features to that truck that make it more reliable based on newer technology. Anyways, I know people are going to light up the comment section. They're going to tell me how wrong I am. Some people may tell me how right I am. But the question I honestly want to ask, and this is for folks who have newer trucks and have had older trucks, do you feel that your newer truck gives you more peace of mind in terms of longer trips, longer towing, heavier towing, the reliability factor versus the older trucks that you might have had in the past? I certainly feel that way, but I'd love to hear from you all. Anyways, it's starting to rain, so we still got a bit of driving ahead of us. If you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.